Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and Joel Elston here. It's Thursday, December 29, 2016. The last Thursday of December in 2016. The last Thursday in 2016. It's also the last December in 2016.
It works both ways.
It does work. Isn't that wonderful how the calendar is so consistent that way? I mean, it's just terrific. But yeah, it's the last show of 2016, and we actually had to skip a week. Christmas kind of got in the way along with some other things, and an inability on my part to remember when we do this. But we're back doing this Think and Grow Rich. We're up to Chapter 4 now. We actually probably should kind of summarize a little bit about Chapter 3 before we move on to it. Chapter 3 was an important chapter, Joel, about faith, and I've been finding my own faith tested recently, and I find that the technique that Napoleon Hill recommends in the book really is quite effective for building up your faith, which kind of surprised me.
Well, I know that in our talks over the couple of years we've known each other, you have historically sort of shied away from that technique in some ways. And I think now that you've implemented it, you're seeing that, wow, this really does work.
It does.
And I also have a belief that most people, when they get to that, no matter what step program or whatever you're looking at, whether it's the Think and Grow Rich steps or the 12 steps of recovery, there always seems to be a step or two where most people get tripped up or think they don't need to do it or think it's silly. And I almost always point to that being the step that keeps people from effectively using the program. Yeah. And in this case, I believe it's step 3 here, or in chapter 3, not step 3, but in chapter 3, where they're talking about, the faith stuff that they're talking about is where most people get tripped up and they get stuck, and it never goes beyond that. So I'm really glad that that during this time you've implemented it, and I've told you before that I've implemented it with reluctance in the past and found it to be incredibly helpful, and you have found that the same way, and it's going to bring us to where we need to bring us. And that's a point, sort of in retrospect, with our audience, that taking the step, following the step, and doing it exactly as proposed. It seems silly, but it's an incredibly effective tool that sort of launches you into the rest of the program.
I can't honestly say that I thought it was silly. That's not, for me, what my bugaboo was. For me, my bugaboo was associating faith with religion, because I have certain issues with particularly with what can actually be found in the Bible when you read the whole book and not just the pieces that the preachers like to tell you about. And because of that reluctance, that was the only context in which I knew the word faith. And because of that context, it made me shy away from wanting to even try faith, even though I'd been raised in a Christian church. But it was that experience that drove me away.
Right. Well, and it goes both ways when we're talking about the law of attraction. I often have my sort of hardcore fundamentalist Christian friends that think the law of attraction is anti-Christian. And I think that my atheist friends, or people that tend not to believe or have issues with belief, think it's too religious. So to me, it proves that it's right, because both sides tend to sort of hate it, and that's how I sort of judge things. If both of those sides hate it, we're probably on the right side here.
Yeah, right.
But that concept of faith being, a lot of what I have talked about this last week with my clients, and I think this sort of fits right in, is we get definitions of words in our head, and that some kind can be detrimental. And one of my most things that most people that have had issues with faith, as you said, equate faith to religion. And this is far from religion. This is not about, it's faith in this process. It's a belief that this process will work. It has zero to do with anything other than this process. I have faith in gravity. It's never failed. And I have faith in this program because when I've seen it implemented properly, it's never failed.
And it's interesting because that's the corollary that many gurus, if you will, of the law of attraction talk about. They equate the law of attraction with the law of gravity, and make the point that one is just as real and impacts us every single time as the other. And I think part of the reason that is a difficult concept, particularly at the beginning when you're first exploring this, it certainly was for me anyway, is I can see the law of gravity instantly anytime I want to. I can pick up a pen on my desk, drop it onto the desk again, and there it is. I can see the law of gravity just work right there.
Sure.
I can't easily do that with the law of attraction. I mean,
exactly.
I can put out there, okay, I want to attract a blue feather, to take the classic Richard Bach example from his book Illusions. I want to attract a blue feather. Well, and the blue feather doesn't instantly appear on my desk. Well, it doesn't work. It's not the same kind of thing. That's what makes it difficult.
I completely agree. And I think that's where we run into it. I think that's where our audience and people who struggle with this it's so, the concept that we're talking, and I don't want to get lost here, but the concept of sort of wrapping up this chapter of understanding that when you start to really buy into it is that's when things start to flow.
Yeah.
When you are doubting it, that is the block, the same block, because it's so, you've so eloquently shared some of your struggles as of late, and that's that block that develops, and no matter how desperately we try, it's so easy to tell people not to worry about something or not to think that way, but when the reality is taking place right in front of you, it's very hard not to worry about it. Very hard.
And one of the things that you've talked about in the past is the book, The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton, which basically talks about a number of things related to quantum physics and how he ties it into biology and so forth. But one of the side topics he talks about is the role of the subconscious mind. And he makes a point that I think I already knew, but I hadn't really fully digested before, which is just how powerful the subconscious mind is. I think he uses a couple of diagrams, and the diagrams are designed to show the impact of the conscious mind versus the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind, basically is like thousands of times more powerful than the conscious mind. Well, as I thought about that as I'm reading it, I'm saying, well, shoot, no wonder I've had so much trouble. I mean, I'm trying to overcome all this negative programming in my subconscious mind. If it's that much more powerful than my conscious mind, yeah, I could see why that would be difficult, for instance, to try to embrace faith. The good news, and this kind of ties into what Chapter 4 of Think and Grow Rich is all about, in fact, it ties in very directly, is we can reprogram it. We can reprogram the subconscious mind, and we can do it in a way that actually builds the faith. And it doesn't have to rely on anything religious-based or anything like that. It's simply repeating commands, if you will, conscious commands into our subconscious mind that reinforce this is what we believe, this is what we believe, this is what we believe. And the strangest thing that happens is we end up believing it.
Well, and Walt, and I think that's when Napoleon Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich, obviously he had, we discussed this, there was no point of reference. He developed this concept. He identified it, much like, Sir Isaac Newton didn't discover gravity. He didn't create it. He was able to explain it. And it's sort of the same thing here. He didn't like, oh, wow, I just created gravity. No, gravity's been there. I've just identified it and put a word to it, an attachment to it.
Right.
And that's what Napoleon Hill has done. So when years later, almost 100 years later, when Bruce Lipton is writing a book explaining the biology of quantum thinking and how it relates, and that's where the faith piece starts to make sense. And the reason I get into quantum thinking and all of that epigenetic theory is it not to cloud the issue, but to make it clear when people say, well, that makes no sense. And we can say, no, here's some science behind this. Here's why it does make sense. Mm-hmm. And I think that does help with the faith, because when you believe an entire, for your entire life, if you believe something, it really is so difficult to set yourself in a motion of change of that thought. And when you believe you're cursed or you're believed all these negative pre-programmed things, it's so easy to say to change that path, but it's not easy to implement because a lifetime has been spent thinking that way.
Yep. Yep, the repetition makes a huge difference. It also, I mentioned the Richard Bach book, Illusions, a little while back there, and it reminds me of something that Bach said in that book. He's describing what it takes to perform the kinds of law of attraction type miracles that get described in that story. And the teacher basically says it takes zero faith. What it takes is imagination. And I think what Bruce Lipton would add to it, although he doesn't perhaps follow that line of thought, but if he were to follow that line of thought, he'd probably say, well, it takes imagination and it takes repetition. You have to keep putting the new message into your subconscious mind. So you have to be able to imagine a different outcome from what you're currently seeing, and you have to repeat it into your subconscious mind over and over again. If you do that, automatically faith just starts popping up. You start believing in this unseen, in this thing that you're reaching out for, that you're hoping is going to happen. You can actually start believing it coming true because you've been telling your subconscious mind it's true.
Well, and Walt, chapter 3 ends with a couple of lines here. What is that, about 5 lines at the end of the chapter? It says, there are no limitations to the mind except those we acknowledge. Both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought.
Yes.
And if you could break down chapter 3 and really accept those 5 lines as fact, that gets you started in a way that, and to me, that was my awakening. I've had this conversation over the Christmas holiday with my mom. Me and my foster son went down to Florida and had a really nice trip, and we stopped by and saw my mom. And one thing my mom has always done is struggled with money. Money has been a struggling factor it's a recurring theme her entire life, and her thought process toward money is where I was sort of taught that way. And now, obviously, I think about it much differently.
Right.
And I find being around her was just so, especially on those topics of that negative thinking that she has built in, and she just doesn't see it.
Yeah.
And she was, very concerned about, how much money I was spending on this trip and Christmas. And I said, relax, it's not a concern. And she said, well, your attitude toward money can be dangerous. and my response to her was, using history as an example, your attitude toward money is clearly not effective. I said, but
it clearly is effective, just in the wrong direction.
Well, yeah. Well, if as anybody measures, if you're looking at money, her way of saving that let's work on those pennies. Let's boy, I don't need this, or versus the concept of there's an abundance. She's always viewing it as a lack. And that's a rough place for her. So, again, my mom's a wonderful lady. I love her very much. But again, those are things that she grew up with that after all these years, it's still a struggle. And today that I'm looking at those last 5 lines, there are no limitations to the mind except those we acknowledge. If we accept that as fact, what we're acknowledging is the limitations that we have set in place for ourselves. Both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought.
And the great beauty of this is that if you follow what Napoleon Hill teaches in the book and just carry out the things that he's talking about, you can actually overcome not only your own programming, but the programming, I guess you could call it your own programming, but more extensively, it's the programming that comes through your family.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that Bruce Lipton talked about indirectly, about how a lot of what goes on in the subconscious mind is transmitted through ways we can hardly even describe what they are, but they're transmitted generationally. I know I had it in my family.
Oh my goodness! And some of the quantum, in quantum thinking and understanding the epigenetics that we talk about is this is very beginning of the study of this. So let's not, I don't want to freak everybody out too much, but the idea that fears and beliefs can be passed through DNA. And one of the things that my initial thought when I thought that was, that's ridiculous. However, one day what told me what was different is one day I was at a pond down in Florida, and it was on a friend's house. She said these baby ducks had just hatched, and I'm talking within a day or two, and they're out there sort of swimming around. They're always very close to their mom. Well, there was this one scenario where the mom had sort of gone around the weeds or some of the water, and there was a sound, and the ducks immediately, the little baby ducklings, started quacking and running to their mom.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there hadn't been enough time for the mom to teach them fear.
Right.
Fear was in their DNA. They instinctively knew. I've also seen a dog who has never shown any signs of fear run across a snake and instinctively was fearful of the snake. And that was handed down.
And interestingly enough, you mentioned passing along through genetics, although Lipton actually points out it isn't so much that it's passed through genetics, it's passed through the energy fields that are generated around cells that overcome genetics. Which is really, I mean, that concept alone is mind-blowing.
Well, and that's where it gets that's why in describing it sometimes I sort of when I say passed down, because that's where that term epigenetics comes in. It is not genetics or DNA as we think about. It's DNA is, in his theory, is not a set thing that most people believe for a long time, and he is one of the discoverers, he's one that helped decode the DNA genome.
Right.
He's so this isn't some random dude that just said, hey, this is what I think. He's going against what he actually was taught in this process, because this is what he's seen. And I think that really gets into a very nice transition into the next chapter of Thinking Grow Rich, chapter 4, which talks about the third step toward riches. And I'm very excited about this one, because this is where a literal practice can be placed that really makes a huge difference. I found that to be the biggest difference for me is the autosuggestion.
Oh, exactly. Because when I was reading the Lipton thing and reading about how there's this, we energetically pass stuff along and we pick stuff up from our parents, even though they weren't intending to teach it to us, we just kind of pick it up almost generationally. To know that there's actually a way that overcomes that, because that's a pretty big influence. First of all, we don't even know it's there. Second of all, it influences us throughout our entire lives. I mean, they can even find, Lipton points to scientific studies that show that if certain things go on in your experience of life as you're in prenatal mode, it'll actually determine the likelihood of whether or not you're going to get diabetes when you're 60. Like, oh my goodness. That's like terrifying when you think about that. But the fact that there's actually a way to overcome that through self-programming, through this autosuggestion is, well, first of all, it's reassuring. And second of all, it also helps us to see perhaps a little bit differently what the nature of this thing that Lipton is that he's talking about. Because really, the big breakthrough that he offers is our genes aren't controlling us.
Yes.
Which is strange. On the one hand, it sounds like he's saying, well, not just the genes, but our energy pool is basically determining whether we're going to be sick. And on the other hand, he's laying a foundation that says, yeah, but you can overcome all of it. You can overcome it through what you suggest to your own subconscious mind. He doesn't actually get to that point in his teaching. He kind of shies away from it. But that's obviously where it goes. And that's clearly what Napoleon Hill's pointing at. How Napoleon Hill came to that concept without knowing what Lipton knows, I have no idea, but it dovetails beautifully.
Well, and that's the piece that I get so excited about is when I instinctively, I talk about this frequently, when I instinctively just, when I heard about the law of attraction, I knew it was right. I knew it's that moment.
It has
in
that
life,
feeling to it, doesn't
yes,
it? You just sense it.
I searched desperately for some type of, I knew it was out there. And as a child, I remember as young as 12 years old saying, okay, what they're telling me can't be right. It's crazy what they're telling me. But I was told that was just Satan was trying to influence me and some other things. And, I'm glad that I was that at 12, I'm glad that Satan had that much faith or desire to change my thinking.
Who knew you were that important?
Yeah, exactly. Because Satan took all the time. This random 12-year-old kid in Florida, let's go attack him, But the idea that I kept looking. And so when I heard about it, I instinctively felt it to be true. However, a lot of it didn't make sense.
Isn't that strange? Because I know exactly what you mean. Because it does have that feeling. You read it, and it's like there's a cellular level reaction that says, yes, 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 yes. And your conscious mind is saying, what?
Right. Because it's so against everything that we were taught. However, as I start to hear, I randomly discovered Bruce Lipton one day, and all of this there's a science behind it now.
Yeah.
So like you're saying, Napoleon Hill discovering this is without the stuff we have now. And then one of the decoders of the DNA, of human DNA, to witness this and talk about it is, to me, it's such an incredible discovery that with all the attention in the world focused on all the craziness in the world, what if the headline of the day of our DNA may not be as set in stone as we thought? What if that were the headline and everybody got into this discussion? What if people started that? Talk about an incredible change in the world instead of what President-elect Trump said or what this one said, or all that silliness that's going on there. Instead of all that, what if our attention was placed in those areas? Wow, because I think this is the biggest discovery of history of mankind. For nobody to know about it is sort of sad.
Well, fortunately, it's not nobody. Fortunately, there's a growing number of people who do know about it, and some of them are actually listeners of our show, which makes us feel good because that means we're helping to influence the universe as well. But you know what? The good news is it's happening. No matter how you look at it, it's happening, and it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing.
Go
ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, chapter 4. When they start, to get into a little more concept of this, it says autosuggestion. The medium for influencing the subconscious mind, the third step toward riches. And autosuggestion has many forms, and we're going to obviously focus on the book, but the idea the automatic suggestion, and I'll just read the first chapter where it says autosuggestion is a term which applies to all suggestions and self-administered stimuli which reach one's mind through the five senses. Stated another way, autosuggestion is self-suggestion. It is the agency of communication between the part of the mind where conscious thought takes place and that which serves the seat of action for the subconscious mind. And as you were talking about at some point, I don't know if we're on air or off air, but that transition for you is that dialogue for you is so important. That's dialogue for all of us.
Oh,
the discovery of that. It's so important.
It's important. And skipping to the third chapter, or third paragraph of this chapter, rather, it describes in more detail why I found it to be important, what I found to be so amazing about it. It says, no thought, whether it be negative or positive, can enter the subconscious mind without the aid of the principle of autosuggestion. Now, I think about that. Here we have the Lipton studies and of course, plenty of psychology studies and even biology studies and so forth that suggest that, talk about suggestion, they suggest that your subconscious mind can be programmed by stuff coming into it. The interesting thing that this paragraph says is that it has to go through the conscious mind. It has to go through a conscious mind process to get to the subconscious mind. Not that it doesn't get to the subconscious, it does, but no thought, whether it be negative or positive, can enter the subconscious mind without the aid of the principle of autosuggestion. And autosuggestion requires a conscious activity to go on. It can be an activity that says, by default, I let it in, but we're still taking on a conscious activity there. That's reassuring for me.
And one of the things that we had talked about, we haven't mentioned in a few weeks now, but I had for a long time implemented a news ban. I quit watching the news, the media ban. I didn't take in any news. I admit during the election I had to watch that train wreck. So, but I'm back on my news ban, and that is a conscious / subconscious programming device, the TV, because you're allowing that in. You're allowing those pictures in. You're allowing the dialogue, whether you agree or disagree with how they're portraying it, you're allowing that to influence your belief system.
And you made the decision.
You made the decision to turn that on.
Yeah.
Now, that becomes it because we're programmed with a negative base of thinking, an automatic negative let's look to the negative. That auto-suggestion becomes, how is this a good thing, or how is this a bad thing? And we're most of the time it's, how is it a bad thing?
Right.
Or what does this mean to me? And I get this random call from a former employee of mine when I was working at another company, and she heard this piece of gossip about the other company that we both used to work for. She called me frantically, like, "Do you know what this means?" And I go, "Nothing. It means nothing. That's what it means. What are you talking about?" I said, "We haven't worked there in 3 years. It's okay. It's not." And I was able to help her see that, but she was talking to somebody who currently works there about this gossip taking place there, and was sort of sad that it just automatically went. And then when she laughed, she said, "I guess it means nothing for us." It doesn't. Whatever that means to them is fine, but it means nothing to us. And that's an important thing, because you watch the news and you think, wow, the lead of CNN or Fox News is this. So obviously it's the most important thing.
And therefore it means that we always, every instant of every day, have the opportunity to choose whether to let something in.
Yes.
That's what you did with your news band, which I've been following, by the way, and I love it. I got to tell you, that's one of the best things that I've done all year, is following your lead and say, you know what? I'm not going to watch news anymore. I did it back in the late 80s and missed the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then I let it go. And now that I'm back to it, it's like, oh, wow, this is so much better. Why didn't I go back to this earlier? Because I know what this is like. It feels better. You go through your day and you're not being inundated with all this horrible negativity. And when you're not inundated by horrible negativity because you're refusing to let it in, you feel better. You feel a whole lot better.
Yes, and that piece for me is it sort of supports this entire concept that we're talking about in chapter 4 of Autosuggestion. And when, again, Napoleon Hill being so far ahead of his time, the media at the time had a little influence compared, nowhere near what they do now.
Oh, no, of course.
But the fact that he's so intuitive with that and is really talking about, you get to be in control of how you program your mind. That's the piece that's amazing here. For a long time, when you're a child, you are programmed by your parents. Your parents will tell you what to think. I remember my mom asking me a question when I was 12 or 13. It was pretty simple question. She would say something, well, how do you feel about that? And then I would proceed to tell her how I felt about it. And then she would often say, well, you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, okay, well, dang, that's your mom. So obviously I'm wrong. Well, the reality is what she didn't understand, still doesn't understand, is the idea that what I feel about that or what I think about that is what I feel or think about that. That's what it is.
And the cool thing indirectly, which you didn't really understand at the time, was that you had the choice whether or not you were going to accept what your mom told you. Now, at the time, you knew no differently, as is true for kids in general. Kids don't know other than to follow what their mom or their dad tells them, because that's their primary source of nourishment and of security and a place to live and all that kind of stuff. So they're the experts. They're the ones you got to follow.
Right.
And that's what you learn. But even back then, under certain circumstances, it could possibly have come about that you would have realized, I get to choose whether or not I believe that. Because it is true. It's true, just as true when you're 2 years old as when you're 52. There's really no difference in how the principle plays out. The only difference is our level of knowledge of it, our level of experience with it, our level of belief that, yeah, I actually get to choose what goes into my mind. And I guess it happens differently for every person, because every person has different experiences. Some people have rougher lives. Some people have better lives. A lot of things happen. But inevitably, at some point in every person's life, we come face to face with this thing. We come to face with this question of, can I control what's going into my mind? And when you come face to face with that, and if you're lucky enough to be presented with information like Napoleon Hill's information, or like Bruce Lipton, or like Sean Aker, or anyone else, when you are faced with the possibility of having a way to do it positively, to choose positively what's going to get in and what's not going to get in, that's when empowerment happens. We're a society, America in particular, is a society that is very wrapped up in empowerment. What better way to empower somebody than to say, you get to choose every moment of every day. And it's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to be overwhelmed with. It's something to celebrate, because you're no longer dependent upon your past programming. You can change it. You can overcome it. And here's how to do it.
Right. And here, and this, again, goes right into where you were going. It says, the next chapter, next paragraph says, nature has so built man that he has absolute control. And I say absolute control with emphasis because it's capital letters.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, absolute control over the material which reaches his subconscious mind through his five senses, although it's not meant to be construed as a statement that man always exercises this control. And that's everything in a nutshell right there.
It is.
We do have absolute, unequivocal, not debatable control. And then we do sort of back off of that and say, but doesn't mean at all that to be construed that we exercise that control. And that's where the rub against all this starts to happen.
Well, it's where the rubber meets the road, because those of us who choose to take control are the ones who accomplish what we want to accomplish, and those who just choose to live by default and let the environment manipulate us are basically saying, well, I'll just go with whatever way the winds of fortune take me, and God help me.
Yes, and I've witnessed miracles. I always use the word miracles. Not everybody's excited about that word, but I see miracles not because they're miracles in the traditional sense. I call it miracles of thinking, miracles that people start to see differently. They start to realize, I am in control of things I had no idea I was in control of. The stuff I thought I was in control of, I have zero control over. That's the amazing part. Other people's actions, the outcome of situations. So much of this is out of my control and I waste my energy. The stuff I am in control of is what I allow in my mind. And that's so exciting to me. I am not a victim any longer of these unforeseen forces. It isn't like there's some random energy tagging me with negative things, or the world's not kicking my ass as I used to think it was doing. My mind is kicking my ass, but it wasn't the world.
And the subconscious mind in particular was what was doing the ass kicking. That's where it was really that. And I had the same experience. I wondered what force was out there that was defeating me so much. And my wife suggested to me, well, you're doing it to yourself. And my instant reaction was, no, I'm not. I've been working so hard in this other direction. It can't be me.
Of course.
And because the me is my conscious mind. That's the only me I knew about. Well, I was aware, theoretically, of the subconscious mind, but I certainly had no idea that it could play such an important role, and that you have to take responsibility, and you have to take on the determination to decide what your subconscious mind is going to feed upon. I didn't realize that part.
Well, and that's the key. I have a Facebook friend. He was an acquaintance through an acquaintance who had read my book, and he asked to be my friend on Facebook, and so he's still in the very negative victim mode of woe is me. So he's a compulsive gambler, and he's early in his recovery. So he wrote me, he said, I heard your book is really good, but I can't afford to buy it.
Oh.
And I said, well, my initial I said, you can't afford $9.99 on Kindle, but I mean, that's maybe he can. I mean, I'm not trying to judge, but I find it difficult that he could have done that. But I said, thank you for writing. I have access to about 50 free copies that I can send people, like a code to go to my publisher's website, and they can download a free copy of my book. So I said, what the heck? I sent the guy the code. I said, all you got to do is go to this website, download the book, and you can read it.
Which is a terrific gift, by the way.
So he said, oh, well, I only have my cell phone. I don't have a computer. And I said, well, you're on Facebook, so you have enough of a cell phone that it will still work. It's clearly you will be able to download it and do that. Then he writes back, I really wanted a real copy.
Oh, my goodness. He has really stuck himself, hasn't he?
Right. And so I said, well, I said, I've offered you and I've given you a code if you choose to. The book is exactly the same. other than not having possession of a book, you would be able to read the same content on your phone. So have a good day. And he was polite, said thank you. And occasionally he will make comments on my Facebook post. And one of the ones recently, he wrote to me and he said, "How do you forget the past?" And the answer simply is you don't forget the past. You look for the new. And, my family's, being mean to me and my family. Well, you've done a lot of mean things to your family. So the reaction, quit looking at all the negative. He's so stuck in the gravity of the negative and all that. That's where most people get stuck at when they get in really low bottoms.
Yeah. I saw that post from him, by the way, that comment that he left. Actually, I was on a post that you left.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I did see it. In fact, I responded to it kind of along the lines of what you said. Basically saying, well, the best way I know of to forget the past is to focus on now and to program now into you. If you do that, if you keep programming now into you, actually what happens is the past starts to fade. I'm not saying that you forget it entirely, but it no longer becomes a part of your regular daily awareness. And that's truly the most important form of forgetting the past. It's not like you want to forget it forever so that you can never, ever recall it. It's that you don't want it to be constantly attacking you or seemingly attacking you. That's really what he's saying. He may not realize that, but that's what he's really saying. And you can do that. There is actually a way to do that, and that's through what we're talking about here, through autosuggestion, through controlling what's going into your mind right now, because that also controls what goes into your subconscious mind right now. And if you're focusing your subconscious mind on what's going on right now, it's not going to spend as much time paying attention to what happened 30 years ago.
Well, and the great thing about this, and this is so important, and I'm really glad we sort of gone down this path, because I think for me, how do you forget the past was his question.
Mm-hmm.
I found out a way how to change the past. And
yeah, that's a really interesting topic right there.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, the events of the past are viewed through the eyes of the person perceiving them.
Right.
If and I often, and I hate to be redundant, but I often talk about some of those trials and tribulations that I went through early in my addiction or in the middle of my addiction, and how I negatively viewed them. And one of the most negative events of my life turned out to be an incredibly necessary event. And once I saw that, the past changed for me, Walt. It changed. It went from being a horribly negative event to, again, a necessary event that I'm very glad happened.
And when you say that you changed it, it isn't that you changed the sequence of events.
No.
You changed the way you perceived how the sequence of events affected you.
And the exciting piece of all that, and this is where it gets really woo-woo for a lot of people, is events are only they only exist in memory and how you perceive them. So in my mind, I did change the event because my perception of that event completely changed. I know that sounds crazy to the average person dealing with stuff, but the as you said, the events, the event of I'm specifically talking about is me eating out of a trash can in the middle of my addiction. That event, the facts of that story doesn't change at all. But how it later impacted my kid, and it had a connection with my son and all that he went through, changed my view of me eating out of a trash can. So when we have that, that's where I believe in this epigenetics. And I go back and I took what was a trauma through changing my perspective of that trauma and it made it into really an informative, transformative event of my life that again had to take place for my life to be for everything that's going on in my life now. That was a necessary event.
And there's also another fascinating aspect to this. And this is an aspect that has historically been brought up in a very negative form. So it makes it a little bit scary to look at. And I guess I'll point to that negative form just because it's one people are going to be at least somewhat indirectly familiar with. And that is the nature of propaganda, whether it be news propaganda or political propaganda or whatever. People who have studied the effects of propaganda have realized that you can tell a population, you can repeat a lie to a population. And if you repeat it over and over and over again, consistently, the lie will replace the truth in the memory of the people in that population. So if the original event was that, I'll make it benign rather than one of the really negative things that they usually draw on. Let's say it's Johnny went and put a block on the chair in the park. And you put out through propaganda that Johnny actually put a ball on a swing. The first memory will disappear if you tell the second memory over and over and over again. And the second memory will become the fact in people's minds. Now, that may not be what actually happened, but if you ask them what happened in their own memory, they'll say, oh, well, he put a ball on a swing in the park.
Yes.
And it wasn't what actually happened.
Right.
Well, the negative there is that, this means that you can reprogram entire populations to follow the whims of some auto dictator, But that's the bad way to look at it. The good way to look at it is he wants to get rid of his memory. Well, guess what? He actually can change the memory.
That's the point.
If he doesn't like the memory, if he doesn't like the way the memory is played out, there's really no need for him to actually remember this is what really happened. What he needs is to have the memory no longer harm him, no longer feel negative and painful and a constant reminder. If he were to change it using the principle of autosuggestion that Napoleon Hill lays out, he would actually remember it having even a different sequence of events. I mean, you could actually program yourself. You could actually, if you took the time to do it, if you had an impoverished childhood, you could over time program yourself to believe that you were actually wealthy as a child.
That is the key to everything. And with this one gentleman in particular, one of the things I always try to work with in people with addiction is it's hard to turn things that happen in addiction into positives. However, one thing that almost always resonates is when you get on the other side of your recovery, when you fight through, you get in recovery, you do this, you will have battled one of the greatest battles that a human could face, overcoming addiction. You will be a stronger person by this, and the events that led to that can be seen as events that led you to become this strong person. That's how I view myself. I was formed in the real me was formed through all the stuff that I went through with my addiction. That made me the person I am today in a very positive way. And that's the thing that we get to label the past. We get to look at it. We get to put numbers and numbers toward it, or sequences of events toward it. We can do all, just like you're saying, we're in control of that. And those are amazing things. And you can retroactively reprogram the brain from trauma, take trauma away. That is the $1 million answer that is going to change everything. In 50 years, we'll view this, I believe, as the greatest discovery as far as mental health goes.
I think you're right. And in fact, you've alluded to the fact that I've been dealing with stuff recently. One of the big struggles I've been dealing with has been financial, and I've been trying to program myself to believe not what the past happened, although certainly I could be reprogramming that part too, but more trying to reprogram what I believe about the future. Because for the longest time now, I've been focused on how my finances are dwindling away and my ability to pay the bills is dwindling away, and it gets scary. And yet I have been consciously, particularly through what we've been studying here with Napoleon Hill, but also through our general conversations about the law of attraction, I've been trying to focus on concentrating on the belief that my finances are going to get better. Despite the sequence of evidence that I've previously been focusing on, I'm trying to convince my subconscious mind that things are actually going to get better. And when you follow the chapter on faith and follow what it teaches, you start to feel that. When you do the previous chapter before that, the chapter on desire, it starts to work. You start to feel it. And what this chapter on autosuggestion says, it actually goes back to the 6 steps in the desire chapter, 2 chapters back, and says, read those aloud twice daily, the written statement of your desire for money, and then seeing yourself, feeling yourself already in possession of that money, which is the chapter on faith. So basically it's saying, tie those 2 together. That's how you do autosuggestion. And when you do autosuggestion that way, what he's saying indirectly, he never says it directly. I wish he would say it directly. But what he's saying indirectly is, if you do those 2 things and tie them together and do them consistently, you will actually convince yourself that you're on a different path from the one that you've seen all along.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's starting to work. And I'll have to tell you, Joel, when it first started to work, I'm sure you know this too. When it first starts to work, it's weird. It's really strange because half the time, the thing that you were focused on isn't there anymore, and the new thing that you're focusing on is there, and then you kind of shift back, and then you shift forward, and it's very disorienting because it's not like you're in that one place now. Now you're shifting between places. It's kind of like being on a sliding sidewalk. It's like, whoa, where did the momentum go this time? But it's also kind of cool because as you get used to it, you start spending more and more time on the side that you're trying to program yourself to. And when you're staying on that side, if you're assuming that you're picking stuff to focus on that's positive for yourself, you start feeling better more and more and more. And that's kind of the inertia you're trying to overcome, is the inertia of sticking to attention to the bad side and focusing more and more on the good side. So that becomes the new momentum. As that momentum is kicking in, that's where the hope comes in. I never understood where hope came in. Now I understand where hope comes in. It comes in through the experience of programming yourself to have faith. Boy, if I had said that phrase 10 years ago, I would have said, what? Now I get it.
Well, I'm so excited that this message is we're able to share this message, because the reason that everyone wakes up every morning, I believe this, that it's hope. We get up because of hope. We get up because we feel our life is going to get better. We get up because there's something better going to be, or something good is going to take place. All this is, we get up with hope. We don't always live with hope. And when you learn to live with hope and then take that hope to expectation and realize that you retroactively, this is, I don't want to get too deep into this because it gets really complicated then, but you can reprogram your past. And by reprogramming your past, you're reprogramming your future. And it's very much a continuum along those lines. If you've always been successful in your mind, there's no reason you're not going to be successful now. And, I forget who said it, but several people have said it. I don't know who the originator was, but, if you take all the money in the United States and divided it equally between each person, in 5 years, the people who were wealthy before will be wealthy again, and the people who were poor before will be poor again. Because it isn't about the money, it's about their belief system. And that's played out thousands of times. People win the lottery, win millions of dollars, amounts you couldn't imagine getting. One guy won $100 million from West Virginia, and within 5 years was dirt, or just totally broke. It's hard to spend $100 million.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah. Or these baseball players grew up poor, and they end up making, several of them. One guy went bankrupt. He had like 19 brand new cars in this garage or something. It's like, wow, you have to work at blowing that much money.
You do, yeah. Well, a classic example is the famous defensive back Lawrence Taylor for the football New York Giants. He's bankrupt, and
yes.
he made multiple millions because he was literally a game changer in the game of football. I mean, his style of being able to take down quarterbacks was previously unrivaled. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. In fact, it has since then changed the way that game is played to the point where they actually have a particular player whose job it is to stop whoever that rushing linebacker is who does the Lawrence Taylor style of doing stuff, to stop him from getting at the quarterback. And it even inspired a movie called The Blind Side to protect his blind side. And yet this very famous football player, once he left the game, couldn't hang on to the money for the very reason you talked about. I also like turning it around, Joel. I like thinking, what if, and it isn't really so much important to do the money distribution or redistribution, but it makes an interesting mental puzzle. What if you were to do that money redistribution thing where everybody got the same amount of money, and at the same time you were to teach everybody there to program themselves to believe that they are rich, to program their subconscious mind to believe that they are rich and they will continue to be rich, and you actually somehow got them to agree, yeah, I'm going to do this reprogramming thing. Now you'd have a completely different result, because what you're saying is correct. If that population doesn't retrain their minds, then within 5 years they're back to poverty. But if they did retrain their minds, 5 years from then, they'd still be wealthy. And more interestingly, if you start off without redistributing the money and you reprogram their minds, the money will redistribute itself to a more equal distribution just because the entire population reprogrammed their minds.
Right.
Which proves that it really isn't the distribution that's making a difference. It's the programming.
Well, but if you could skip the redistribution process, if you got everybody to believe this, it would be automatic it would take care of itself.
That's right.
And that's the piece that a lot of people, I'll hear people say all kinds of that are stuck in negative thoughts about why, this isn't fair, or this, families of generations of poverty keep repeating poverty. And it really shows how people can get stuck in a belief system of what things are. And I have I've mentioned a young man before that he's an African-American man I met randomly one day at a McDonald's, and make the story as short as possible. No one in his family has ever graduated high school. Mm. He was the first one to graduate high school. Very sharp young man. And him and I were talking. I gave him my card. We had several conversations, and he was excited about being the assistant manager at McDonald's. Ah. No disrespect to anybody who works at McDonald's. It's a great starting job for many people. However, usually it's not considered one of the best ways to wealth. And even assistant managers still making a little bit more than minimum wage often. Right. And so he was excited that he was going to be getting from like $9 an hour, he's going to be getting like a 50-cent an hour raise when he gets promoted to his next position. And I'm like, wow, this is a really sharp kid. So we were talking about goals and different things, and the idea of him going to college or taking any additional training was beyond him. He never had any reference with that. So we talked about the different technical schools, and I was talking to him on the phone probably 4 or 5 times. And when he was telling his mom about how excited he was that he was going to be able to go to a technical school to be a radiology technician, she was very upset. Yeah. She called me and said, what are you trying to do to my son? I'm going, wow. I was shocked by the question. And she said, he's going to run this good job at McDonald's. And I said, he doesn't need to leave the job at McDonald's. He can just still go to school. But he will be able to, even as a starting radiology tech is going to pay almost twice as much as what McDonald's is paying. So the mom battled for a long time. He had a big issue. She did not want him to do this. Well, halfway through school, he got a job at the hospital, and he was, making more than he was at McDonald's. So he left McDonald's, eventually became a radiology tech, met a radiologist who hired him to work at his office, really befriended this guy, really saw this great kid who did it, and eventually paid for him to go to school to be a radiologist. Wow. Now, this is a young man that's entire life changed when he changed his view of the world. He would have been stuck at assistant man, and he would have just accepted that as reality and been there. He's going to, I think it's next year he graduates, or before he starts that next crazy amount of like med school and all the stuff. But what an incredible life-changing situation he's been placed in.
And I'll bet my bottom radiology dollar that when he made those steps, despite all the resistance that came from his mom, and his mom saw that he could climb out of it, I can only imagine how much that impacts positively her own subconscious mind, because she was a victim of her own training too.
Well, we had that conversation. And by the way, since then, I've had nothing. She sends me letters and emails and thanking me and apologizing that she was ever rude to me, and just could not believe that anybody would. And I didn't really do anything. I just helped him see these things. I took no action myself other than helping him see it and making the connection for him. But she just sees it so differently. Her other kids are going to be different because of their history of their family change, because she gets to change the narrative of the history of the family.
There's the key right there. That's what we were just talking about. You changed the story. The story is no longer the same story. The facts of the past are still there, but their thought process about them has changed. And their belief factor has changed. And it all happened through this process of suggestion. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of this, Walt, is this autosuggestion is a gift. We get to dictate. We are the gateway of what gets through, and we're in charge of that. We have complete control of that.
You know, one of the things that the Lipton book was very good. One of the things that I didn't like about the Lipton book is he's doing all this mind-bending stuff about, you know, how we can positively improve our species, how you know, all kinds of great things can happen that, you know, medicine says, that traditional medicine says can't happen, and they can happen. And then he comes out with statements that basically say we're destroying our world. We're basically locked into this cosmic struggle that's going to lead to the extinction of all mankind. And I'm saying, wait a minute. Are you paying attention to what you wrote, Mr. Lipton?
Yeah, I once again, I choose the part of the message.
Yeah, me too.
Where we're going,
But I just wonder to myself, the more that he studies this stuff, when does he? At some point, you know, in his own experience, he's going to start changing that thought process. If he is true to what he's studying, that process is going to change at some point. And when it changes, I look forward to the day where the book that comes out says something to the effect of, you know, all that stuff about how fragile the Earth is that I wrote about, throw all that out.
Well, and it gets to, but that gets to the point. You're seeing his evolution in thinking too. I mean, for him to be one of the original people working on the Human Genome Project, to go so opposite of where they were, what he was learning. He insisted on seeing what he was seeing, not believing what he's being told he was seeing, if I said that properly.
Yes.
and he really believed that. And as these revelations start to come about, I have no doubt that book or that statement will be made. In fact, I may have heard in some YouTube stuff him getting close to that.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes. But he's evolving too.
Exactly. We all are.
Yes. And so it's an exciting time, Walt. And I do look back. I do look forward to a time when people look back on this time saying these discoveries are what changed everything, because this is what will change the world one day. It's not getting any attention because, like you said, but almost in the beginning of the show, you can't see the law of attraction immediately like you can see how the law of gravity works. So the idea that when we get this out there and it becomes a fact, a belief for the masses, the world will change in drastic ways.
In ways that we can hardly even imagine. By the way, we're almost out of time, but if you aren't already following along with us, you can download Think and Grow Rich in many places online for free. It's now part of the public domain. And next week, we're going to be talking about Chapter 5, Specialized Knowledge, Personal Experiences or Observations, the fourth step toward riches. So you want to be sure to join us for that. And Joel, it's been a pleasure as usual doing the show. I mean, I say that every week, but it's becoming more and more of a pleasure every week.
I love it myself, Walt. It's so good. It's been a great year, and I cannot wait to see what 2017 holds for us.
Me too. It's going to be phenomenal. So we'll see you all next year, and we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.